Zaria didn't cry when she walked into the ER. She didn't clutch her mother's hand. She didn't carry a stuffed animal or ask how long it would take. She just walked, 10 years old, silent, black, terminal. No one looked up. Her mother, Tamara, held the paperwork like it weighed more than her child. Her eyes were cracked open by too many sleepless nights, her breath shallow from learning to hold it around authority figures in white coats. She didn't ask where to go. She knew. At the triage desk, a nurse barely glanced at the name. Emergency. Tamara slid the folder forward. A single line on the top page read, Stage 4 neuroblastoma, terminal. But Zaria didn't look like a dying child. She stood upright, calm, unblinking, almost unreadable. From across the corridor, Dr. Elijah Brooks saw them enter. He wasn't on call. He wasn't even meant to be there that early. But the moment he caught sight of Zaria's posture, shoulders square, face hollow, he set down his coffee like it suddenly didn't matter. There was no panic, no sobbing, no fear, and that felt wrong. Minutes later, in the exam room, Dr. Vaughan flipped through her chart without looking at her once. African-American girl, 10 years old, stage a 4. No reported pain. He looked up, unimpressed. She's not crying. That's not bravery. That's behavior. Tamara frowned. Excuse me? Vaughan stood. Kids cry when they're scared. If she isn't scared, it's not because she's strong. It's because she doesn't understand what's happening. Brooks flinched. Or maybe she understands exactly what's happening. The silence that followed was heavy. Not with confusion, but with something more dangerous. Assumption. Zaria, sitting on the exam table, stared at the floor. Her hands didn't shake. Her feet didn't swing. And when Vaughan placed his hand on her shoulder to adjust her gown, she didn't flinch, not even a blink, which raised a question no one could yet answer. Was she unafraid? Or had she simply stopped expecting anyone to believe she was in pain? The room had no heart monitor, no blinking lights, no sense of urgency, just a girl who didn't cry and a doctor who'd already made up his mind. Dr. Vaughan scribbled into the chart, his pen striking paper like a judge stamping guilt. Patient presence with no visible discomfort, no verbal complaints, vitals steady. Recommend continued observation. Tamara shifted in her seat. She's in pain. She just doesn't act like it. Vaughan didn't look up. Pain without expression is just a theory. And I don't treat theories. Dr. Brooks exhaled sharply from the corner. You ever stop to ask why she's not expressing it? You think it's a coincidence that a 10-year-old black girl learns to be silent in pain? Vaughan turned to him slowly, with that trademark smirk, the one that always bordered somewhere between tired sarcasm and academic arrogance. You're going to make this about race. Brooks didn't blink. It's already about race, you just don't know it because it doesn't affect you. Zaria sat there like a photograph, framed, still and uninvited to speak. Only her eyes moved. They weren't blank. They were watching, cataloguing, as if she already knew this wasn't the first time her body would be in a room while people debated whether it deserved to be believed. Outside the room, 2 nurses walked by. One whispered, not softly enough. Another strong black girl. At least she's not dramatic like the last one. The other laughed under her breath. They didn't notice that Dr. Sanders had been standing a few steps behind them. She didn't interrupt, but her hand clenched tighter around the tablet she was holding. Back inside, Vaughan continued writing. Patient appears emotionally dissociated, possibly underinformed about her condition. Tamara's voice cracked. She knows she's dying. Vaughan glanced up, unfazed. And that doesn't bother her. Tamara swallowed hard. It bothers her so much. She stopped trying to get anyone to care. Brooks stared at the girl on the exam table. Her hands were still, her shoulders didn't tremble. But something in her jaw, tension, held in like a scream with nowhere to go. Dr. Sanders reviewed the MRI scans in the diagnostics room, her brow furrowed not from what she saw, but from what she didn't. No lesions, no visible nerve compression, no structural anomalies, just an image of a brain that had learned to survive by going unnoticed. Meanwhile, Brooks sat beside Zaria in the small recovery room. She hadn't moved in 10 minutes. He'd seen patients in comas with more reflexes. He leaned slightly forward, voice soft. Zaria, you don't have to talk, but if something hurts, you can show me. Her eyes didn't meet his. Instead, she slowly reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it on the table between them. Brooks unfolded it. It wasn't a note. It was a drawing. A stick figure girl. Red circles around the arms, the chest, the legs. No mouth, no eyes, no voice. He looked back at her, still nothing. Just that tight jaw, those still hands, and suddenly her silence wasn't silence anymore. It was protest. It was memory. It was defense. In the hallway, Dr. Vaughan brushed past a group of interns. One of them asked, too casually, "That the neuroblastoma case?" Vaughan nodded. "Yeah, the quiet one. You know how they are. Suffer in silence until they don't." He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. The weight of it was built into the tone of... Dr. Sanders heard it, and this time she did speak. Or maybe they suffer in silence because when they do speak, no one listens. Back in the room, Brooks folded the drawing carefully. He didn't put it in her file, he put it in his pocket. Dr. Vaughan stood at the board in the diagnostics room, listing symptoms with mechanical confidence. No physical response to pain, no reported nausea, stable vitals, emotionally flat affect. He tapped the last one twice with the marker. That's the one, she's not connecting. Probably psychological, learned dissociation. Typical in these cases. Dr. Brooks stared at the board, not at the list, at the word typical. You keep saying that. Typical. What does that even mean? Vaughan didn't pause. It means I've seen it before. With who? A beat? With her type. The room went silent. Sanders looked up from her tablet. Brooks clenched his jaw. Vaughan kept going as if nothing had happened. We don't need to dramatize it. Kids from certain environments, poverty, single parents, urban trauma, sometimes mimic symptoms for attention. It's not malicious, it's conditioning. That was the moment Dr. Sanders closed her tablet. She walked out, not angrily, deliberately. In the hallway, Zaria's room was still. Tamara stood at the window, arms crossed, watching her daughter stare blankly at the ceiling. "She's not faking," she whispered. "She's exhausted." Sanders stepped in gently. "May I sit with her?" Tamara nodded without speaking. Dr. Sanders sat beside Zaria and said nothing for 6 full minutes. Then she asked, "Zaria, when was the last time someone believed you?" Zaria didn't respond, but her eyes finally moved, just slightly toward the window away from everyone where it was quiet. Tamara sat alone in the hallway just outside the glass door to Zaria's room, her back slouched against the faded blue wall, arms wrapped around herself like they were the last defense she had left. She wasn't crying. There were no tears left. Just the silent kind of sorrow that seeps into your posture, the kind of exhaustion that becomes part of how you sit, how you blink, how you breathe. Her daughter lay inside the room, a ghost in a living body, and nobody seemed to care unless she screamed. But Zaria didn't scream, and that was the problem. Inside the diagnostics lounge, Dr. Vaughan stood over a spread of scan results and lab reports, flipping through them with the kind of detached intensity that only people who had learned to distrust emotion considered a virtue. To him, every case was numbers, every symptom a puzzle, and every patient a subject to be proven, disproven, or dismissed. "I ran a full pain response panel," he announced flatly, glancing at Dr. Brooks across the table. "Minimal variation in nerve conductivity, no systemic inflammation. Neurological input is normal. If she's not feeling pain, it's not because something's broken. It's because she's learned to ignore it." Brooks didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the chart but not reading it. His mind was elsewhere, on the look Zaria gave the window, on the drawing she had handed him without speaking, on the sentence Vaughan had dropped like it was clinical fact. Her type. "You think her silence is a behavioral defect," Brooks said quietly, his voice low but grounded. "I think it's a survival strategy." Vaughan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The room didn't need words to feel full of noise. Sanders entered a moment later, her expression unreadable but her movements intentional, as if she had come to deliver something she had rehearsed 100 times in her head. "I pulled every pediatric chart from this hospital over the last 3 years," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Guess what I found? Black girls under the age of 12 are 40% less likely to receive follow-up pain evaluation after initial intake. And you know what else? When they do report pain, they're twice as likely to be labeled as exaggerating. Vaughan scoffed under his breath, but he didn't deny it. He just leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, and muttered, "Stats don't treat patients. Doctors do." Sanders stepped forward. "No. Stats expose the doctors who don't." And in that moment, something shifted in the room, not in Vaughan's expression, not in the air, but in the authority. For the first time since Zaria arrived, the conversation wasn't about her symptoms. It was about the system. Back in Zaria's room, the girl lay completely still. Not asleep, not awake. Somewhere in between where children go when the world has decided they're too quiet to matter. Her hands, small and veined like paper, rested on her stomach. Her eyes were open, but not focused on anything in the room. Not her mother, not the machines, just the light bleeding through the window. Dr. Brooks stepped in slow and soft and sat beside her without speaking. After a moment he said, not with force but with intention, "Zaria, when you were little and something hurt, did anyone ever tell you not to make a scene?" No answer, not from her mouth, but the corners of her eyes barely tightened, and that was enough. The hallway was colder than the room, not by temperature but by presence. It was one of those corridors hospitals forget. No paintings, no windows, just a stretch of beige walls and flickering overhead lights that hummed with apathy. Tamara had been pacing for the past 7 minutes. Her boots echoed softly against the tile, but no one came to ask if she needed anything. She had stopped expecting them to years ago. Dr. Vaughan stepped out of the diagnostics wing holding a tablet, walking with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing no one will ever question your tone. His expression was unreadable, polished, restrained, clinical. He saw Tamara. He didn't slow down. "Miss Fields," he said, not looking up from the screen. "We're continuing with conservative care. There's no need for additional imaging. As of now, there's no medical indication of distress." Tamara didn't respond immediately. She looked at him like someone trying to decide if a person is worth the breath it would take to correct them. Then, quietly, but not softly, she said, "You really think she's not in pain?" Vaughan glanced up. "She hasn't indicated that she is." Tamara stepped forward 1 step only, but it was enough to halt the air between them. "You people always want proof, a chart, a scan, a scream, but only the kind of scream you can label. You want her to cry in a way that fits your template, so you can nod, prescribe something mild, and feel proud you solved it." Her voice cracked now. Not from weakness, but from weight. "But if she stays quiet, if she handles it like we taught her to, because we didn't want her arrested at 12 for being loud, you decide she's lying." Dr. Vaughan's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Tamara kept going, voice rising now, no longer just for Vaughan, but for the walls, the interns pretending not to listen, the nurses who had stopped typing, the system itself. "You want her to scream just so you can say she's dangerous. You want her quiet, just so you can say she's lying. You don't want her to be anything, because you've already decided what she is." Brooks had stepped out of the room just in time to hear her, Sanders too, and for once, Vaughan didn't have a comeback. Because in the long fluorescent silence that followed, all that could be heard was the sound of a mother refusing to let her child disappear. Back in the room, Zaria had turned her head slightly toward the door. She hadn't heard the words, but she felt the air change. She knew that for the first time in days, someone was making noise on her behalf, and for a girl who had learned to survive through silence, that meant everything. The hallway cleared slowly, like smoke after a confrontation no one wanted to acknowledge had happened. Dr. Vaughan disappeared into the upper wing, not saying a word to anyone, not leaving orders, not offering clarity, just absence, the most common form of leadership in systems built on denial. Inside the diagnostics room, Brooks stood over Zaria's chart, flipping through it slowly, eyes scanning not just for patterns, but for permission. Some written code, some overlooked line, that would justify what he was already planning to do. He turned to Sanders, who was seated nearby, tapping nervously on her tablet without looking up. "We're not going to find this in a file." She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "You're thinking functional imaging. Brooks didn't answer. He was already walking toward the storage cabinet. "I'm thinking we stop waiting for permission." An hour later, in the MRI prep room, Zaria lay still under the giant arc of the machine, headphones over her ears, eyes open but unfocused. She hadn't asked what they were doing. She hadn't asked why. She had just nodded, stepped inside, and said nothing. Tamara stood behind the glass window, arms crossed again, heart pounding like it used to when she was 15 and trying to make it home past curfew in neighborhoods where sirens meant run and uniforms meant freeze. "You sure this is safe?" she asked quietly. Brooks replied without turning around. "Not any safer than being invisible." Sanders adjusted the parameters on the console. She didn't say a word. The scan began. Color-coded images appeared on the screen, slow and eerie like ghost photography. Zaria's brain lit up in pieces, soft pulses of activity blooming and fading like underwater bioluminescence. And then a pattern emerged. Not a tumor, not a lesion, but something else. Disconnect. Brooks leaned in. The anterior cingulate cortex, pain perception pathway. It's dim. Sanders's eyes narrowed. Not inactive, just under-communicating. Brooks stared at the screen like it had just whispered a secret only he was allowed to hear. "She's feeling the pain, but it's not being sent anywhere her body knows how to react to." Sanders blinked. "So she's trapped in it." He nodded slowly, jaw clenched. "Exactly, it's not bravery, it's not dissociation, it's not silence, it's a cage." Behind the glass, Tamara stared at her daughter's motionless body. She couldn't read the screen. She couldn't interpret the graphs. But something in the stillness made her knees buckle slightly. She gripped the counter. Her lips parted. "So all this time—" Her voice faded. There was no one to finish the sentence, because the only thing worse than thinking your child might be exaggerating is learning she's been enduring more pain than you ever imagined, and you never knew how to ask the right questions. Dr. Brooks stood frozen in front of the imaging screen, as if movement might erase the data he was finally seeing. The images were now printing behind him, slowly feeding into the tray with a mechanical rhythm that felt almost cruel, steady, indifferent, detached. Zaria's brain was lighting up in ways that textbooks didn't teach. Not broken, not numb, just misrouted. The kind of wiring no one looks for, especially not in black girls who don't scream when they're supposed to. Dr. Sanders leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "How many kids like her have we missed?" Brooks didn't respond. He was still staring at the phrase on the top of the scan analysis summary, perception intact, expression inhibited. It was medicine's way of saying, she feels it, but she learned to keep it buried. In the family lounge, Tamara sat with her head in her hands, breathing slow like she was trying not to exhale everything she had left. A nurse had brought her tea. It was untouched. Dr. Vaughan entered. He looked different, not dramatically, but less composed, less confident. "The MRI showed something unexpected," he said. Tamara looked up. Her voice was hoarse. "Let me guess, she's not faking it." Vaughan nodded, eyes on the floor. "She's been feeling everything, but her body doesn't know how to show it anymore." Tamara laughed once, sharp and bitter. "Neither do I." Later that evening, Dr. Brooks returned to Zaria's bedside. She was awake, staring at the ceiling again, same position, same silence. But something had changed. He sat down slowly and placed the scan photos on the table next to her. "We found it. The thing no one believed existed." Zaria didn't move, but her eyes shifted just barely toward the edge of the photo. "So it's real?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Brooks smiled. "You're real. That's what matters." He took out the folded paper she had given him on day one, the one with the faceless drawing and red circles, and placed it beside the scan. "You diagnosed yourself. You just didn't know the name for it. Some stories aren't meant to be shouted. Some aren't even meant to be heard the first time. But when someone finally listens, when someone sees, that's when silence becomes a language we can all understand. And if you're here reading this, maybe you're someone who's learning how to listen too. Maybe you're someone who knows not every cry comes with sound." The meeting room was unusually full that morning. Chairs scraped against the floor, papers rustled under nervous fingers, and the faint buzz of overhead fluorescence felt louder than ever. Most of the staff didn't know why they were called in. A few did, and one, Dr. Vaughan, sat at the head of the table with a folder resting in front of him that he hadn't dared to open since the night before. Across from him, Dr. Brooks placed a single MRI scan on the table. No preamble, no speech, just the image. "This is Zaria Fields," he said, his voice even but charged with something sharper than anger. 10 years old, diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma. For 3 days she was labeled unexpressive, emotionally flat, possibly faking symptoms. And she wasn't. No one moved. She has intact pain perception, but due to a rare neurological miswiring, her body fails to communicate distress in a recognizable way. It's real, it's measurable, it's treatable. He looked around the room. And we nearly missed it, because she didn't look like she was hurting. Dr. Sanders stepped forward slowly, with a stack of papers in hand. Internal data, charts, audit logs, reports no one had asked for until now. Over the past 2 years, black pediatric patients at this hospital were 37% more likely to be given delayed pain intervention. They were also 58% more likely to have their symptoms attributed to behavioral factors instead of clinical ones. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every number she spoke was a mirror, and everyone in that room had to look. Tamara sat just outside the room, not listening, but feeling the weight of everything she had screamed into silence finally being said out loud. Zaria was still resting, still quiet. But this time she wasn't invisible. Her scans had become testimony. Her stillness had become evidence. Dr. Vaughan finally opened the folder in front of him. Inside was Zaria's intake form, blank spaces where pain levels should have been scored, check marks where assumptions had been made. He swallowed, hard, then looked up. "We failed her." Brooks didn't blink. "You failed hundreds like her." Vaughan stood slowly, his voice low. "From this moment forward, every pediatric intake will include a neurological observation layer. Every pain report will require dual verification, and He hesitated. "I'll be stepping down from diagnostic leadership, effective immediately." No applause, no relief, just silence. But this time it was the kind of silence that meant space was being made, for voices that had been ignored, for truths that had been suppressed, and for a girl who had learned to speak without making a sound. Later that afternoon, Dr. Brooks walked alone down the East Wing corridor, the one with the wide windows that overlooked the city skyline. The sunlight came in soft through the dusty glass, painting golden shapes on the floor that flickered like shadows, trying to make sense of themselves. He wasn't rushing. For the first time since Zaria had arrived, he didn't feel like he had to. The urgency wasn't in the blood pressure monitors or lab results anymore. It was in the air, in the memory of what had nearly been missed. He reached Zaria's room and paused at the door, hand resting on the frame. Inside, she was awake, sitting upright now. Her head turned slightly toward the window, just as it had been days ago, but there was something different in her posture. Not more energy, not more alertness, just all permission, like someone had finally told her it was okay to exist in this space. He stepped in slowly, pulling the chair beside her bed, with the kind of silence that feels respectful, not afraid. "Your scans told us everything," he said gently. "But I think you knew that before we did." Zaria looked at him for a moment, then very carefully she nodded. "You believed me," she whispered, and Brooks smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just honest. "I believed you, not the report. And that's not the same thing." Outside the room, Tamara sat with Dr. Sanders at a small table in the waiting area. Neither of them was speaking, but the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was reverent, like two people who had finally watched a storm pass without having to prove to anyone that the clouds were real. Tamara leaned forward. She used to try so hard to explain what hurt. She'd draw it, write it, point to things, and every time someone told her it wasn't enough, she just stopped. Sanders nodded slowly, fingers running over the edge of the paper cup in her hands. "She didn't stop because she couldn't explain. She stopped because we didn't deserve her explanation." That night, Dr. Vaughan walked through the empty diagnostic floor. Every light off except one in the corner where the intake charts were filed. He opened the cabinet slowly, pulled out Zaria's folder again. He didn't look at the scan this time. He looked at the intake form, at his own handwriting, at the sentence he had circled on day 1. No signs of distress. He took a pen from his coat pocket, crossed the line out, and above it, in all caps, wrote, "We never looked." Morning returned to the hospital like it always did, without apology, without warning. The floor shined a little brighter under the janitor's polish, but the air carried the same weight it always had. There were no balloons, no celebratory codes over the intercom. Just another day in a building where Payne wore white coats and sat behind clipboards, but in one room, room 417, things were different. Zaria was sitting up eating breakfast, slowly but with her own hands. Her eyes no longer searched the corners of the room for exit signs. They moved slowly now, deliberately, like someone relearning what it meant to take up space. Beside her, Tamara sipped coffee, hot this time, and for the first time in weeks her legs weren't trembling under the table. Dr. Brooks stepped in, clipboard under his arm, but he didn't open it. Instead, he pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down, like he wasn't there to examine her at all. "Zaria," he began softly, "you should know." Your voice changed things. She looked up, quiet, chewing a bite of toast. "But I didn't say anything," she replied. He smiled. "Exactly." Across the hospital, Dr. Sanders stood before a group of interns, leading the morning case discussion. Behind her, a projection screen displayed 2 brain scans, side by side. On the left, a textbook image of pain response. On the right, Zaria's scan. The difference wasn't in what was missing, it was in what had been missed. "Sometimes," Sanders told them, "a patient's silence isn't emptiness. It's the sound of being unheard so many times, they stopped wasting breath trying." One of the interns raised a hand. "So what do we do when the symptoms don't match the noise?" Sanders didn't answer right away. She clicked the screen off, turned to face them directly. "You listen harder." Dr. Vaughan didn't attend the lecture. He sat alone in his office, surrounded by files, data, numbers, all the things he had trusted more than human faces. On the desk in front of him was a single sheet of paper, Zaria's first pain report, blank. He stared at it for a long time before finally opening his drawer and placing it inside, like an artifact too dangerous to throw away, but too sacred to forget. There were some lessons you didn't write into policy. You carried them in your silence, the same way Zaria had carried hers. It rained the morning Zaria was discharged, not the kind of storm that soaks the world in chaos, but the kind that whispers through hospital windows, making you believe the sky is letting go of things too heavy to carry any longer. The nurses at the station greeted her without pity this time. They had learned slowly and awkwardly that their small talk wasn't what this girl needed. What she needed, what she had always needed, was to be seen without having to explain why. Tamara pushed the wheelchair down the hallway with one hand on the handle and the other wrapped gently around her daughter's shoulder. There were no goodbyes, no parade of doctors offering apologies wrapped in medical language. Just nods, just eyes that stayed a little longer than before. That alone was revolutionary. Dr. Brooks walked beside them, quiet, not as a physician, but as a witness. "We'll be following up regularly," he said softly, "but for what it's worth. You've already done more for this hospital than most of us ever will." Zaria tilted her head, her eyes still calm, still unreadable in the most articulate way. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just placed a folded piece of paper in Brooks' hand before exiting the doors. He opened it after they had left. It was another drawing, this time a small figure standing beside a giant pair of ears, the caption underneath, scribbled in shaky handwriting, "You finally listened." That afternoon in the staff lounge, someone had taped a quote to the bulletin board. No name, no context, just black marker on torn printer paper. She wasn't quiet because she was strong. She was strong because she had no choice. Everyone passed it. Most read it. Some stopped. But one person, an intern, barely a month into her rotation, read it twice. Then turned to her friend and whispered, "Is this the girl from the neuro case?" And her friend answered, not with sarcasm, not with indifference, "No, this is the girl who made us better doctors." That night, on a nearly empty bus heading home, Dr. Sanders sat with her phone in hand, screen dimmed, scrolling past news alerts and unread messages. She stopped on one thing, a photo. Zaria, standing beside her mother in the lobby. No smile, just presence. She saved the photo. Not to remember the case, but to remember the silence. And you reading this now, you're part of that silence too. You stayed until the end. You listened. You felt it. And maybe that's the only diagnosis that matters anymore, because some stories don't scream, some whisper, and hope someone's still there. So if this story stayed with you, don't scroll away in silence. Subscribe to Black Canvas, where voices like Zaria's won't go unheard again. And if you've ever had to explain your pain more than once to be believed, you're not alone. We heard you, and we'll keep listening.